For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
A warm from Evo. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Houston Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you guys. Joining me in segment number 2, we are going to have one of our good friends, Ryan McIntyre, aboard. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He's going to be chatting with me about what we can expect from some of these Big 12 teams in the transfer portal. I know that he's going to do an amazing job taking a look at that all throughout the year, as he does a tremendous job with the Ryan McIntyre Show, taking a look at all things West Virginia. We did the interview before we knew that Eduardo Andre, who I call Eduardo Andre 3000 for Fresno State, was going to be transferring on over to West Virginia. So we're going to be taking a look on that front. We're going to be diving into how some of these coaches have not decided to bring over a lot of the players that they were coaching at their previous stop. Like we've noticed with a lot of these coaches, Darren DeVries is an example of this. They haven't brought over a lot of guys from their old stomping grounds. You expected him to maybe bring over a little bit more than just his son over to Drake. So we're going to be having that conversation as well. And in the final segment, going to give you guys a recap of all the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Now, the deadline to enter into the transfer portal is May 1st. So I'm thinking that at the time of this podcast, we're not going to have them all in quite yet. I think that we're going to have a little bit of cleanup on this tomorrow, but we're going to talk a little bit about that with Ryan McIntyre as well. And as I did not get in any Twitter/X questions, and I do want you to fire those in. If you do have something that you want me to address on the show, whether that be question, comment, segment idea, what have you, you've got one of two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNR_41. Keep in mind, letters they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other way, that is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. But that is very interesting to dive in on the fact that all transfers, whether they be graduate transfers, whether they be just underclassmen, what have you, they all have to enter into the transfer portal by May 1st. And I think as a result, we're going to know what we're getting a little bit earlier in the offseason as opposed to past off seasons. Is there probably going to be a few guys that linger in the transfer portal? Absolutely. And just because the deadline to enter the transfer portal is May 1st doesn't mean these guys have to be having their mind made up by May 1st. I don't know if there is a deadline for that. As far as I saw, there's not. So you could legitimately have a guy in like October decide that he's going to be playing for a certain school, though I don't think we're going to be seeing a lot of that just with the way that the academic calendar is. But I do think that as a result, we're going to know what we're getting a little bit earlier here in the offseason. I think that's going to lead to just a little bit less in general in terms of some of these guys that they are going to be lingering until like August, September, things like that, because we've noticed that the last few seasons, some of these guys, they do wait until the last minute. I think that that's going to make it a little bit easier on us handicappers, which is very big, because when it comes to evaluating 362, and I think it's going to be 363 D1 teams, as Mary Hurst, I believe, is going up to the D1 level, it makes it a little bit of a challenge. So any sort of ease that we can get is nice, and I think that that should be able to deliver a little bit for us. And hopefully I can make things easy on you this offseason, as I'm with you guys every single day, and a man that does a great job day in and day out taking a look at this great sport of college basketball. That'd be Ryan McIntyre. We're going to be talking about so many different topics with him, including the fact that we do have the transfer portal closing for all these guys on May 1st, and that's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Houston Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Houston Family Podcast, and it is always great to be joined by this man, Ryan McIntyre. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. He's a man that has been around college basketball, as he was part of the coaching staff over at South Carolina when they made their Final Four run for West Virginia for quite a few years as well. And now with regards to West Virginia, does a great job on the Ryan McIntyre Show, taking a look at all things out there in the great state. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac with Mac spelled MAC altogether. And Ryan, great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Always appreciate it, Greg. Looking forward to talking some hoops.
Always looking forward to you joining me. And how about if we talk about first things first? Really the biggest thing that I've seen over the last 48 hours, it just feels like there are some teams that get it right in the transfer portal, and with UConn, they're not bringing in 100 billion guys, but what I love about them is that they know what they have coming back, and they know the pieces that they need to really accent and complement them. They bring in Aiden Mahady on Monday, and I want to get your thoughts here because I just look at all the moves made here in the offseason, and surely I think that Kansas has had a tremendous offseason, and if you look at every single one of their moves, it probably trumps that of UConn, but if I'm looking at one singular player going to a team that it just really fills the need and it feels like it all makes sense, I think that this is one of the biggest moves that we've seen all offseason long.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, he was unbelievable at St. Mary's for Randy Bennett. And you're right. UConn seems to get it right in the portal, whether it was Tristan Newton, then Cam Spencer last year, now Aiden Mahany. They seem to know what they want. They know their identity. They're very selective, and it helps to have back-to-back national championships in that pedigree going for them, where they can be more selective. Like you said, they're going to add a couple more pieces, I think, in the portal. But like you said as well, I think it's going to be the right pieces that fit their culture.
Absolutely. I think that UConn is once again in for a nice year. And I mean, it's just one of these cases where Dan Hurley, I feel like he deserves the benefit of the doubt with everything that he has been able to do here in the past few seasons with them being able to win back-to-back titles. He's certainly a guy that makes that list. And I do want to sort of broaden that out a little bit more. Is there a few coaches out there that you take a look at them and you think, all right, I don't necessarily know how the pieces are going to fit, and certainly I know how the pieces are going to fit with UConn, but just utilizing them as an example, is there a few teams where you might have a few question marks with the roster? You might not know how the pieces fit, but there's just a coach out there that you know that they're going to be able to get the job done, and you're very willing to give that coach the benefit of the doubt.
I think everybody's going to fall in love with Kansas, Indiana, just especially with Kansas, being able to bring back a lot of their roster and then some of the portal. A guy that he flew under the radar was his first year in Oxford last year. I trust Chris Beard to get it done in the portal. Like the class he's bringing in at 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", kind of players, Dre Davis, Devon Barnes, Michael Brown-Jones, and Malik Diaz, like guys from winning program. I like what Ole Miss did in the portal. Another program, it seems like they always get it right as well, as Alabama, bringing over Aiden Holloway from Auburn, and then Houston Millett from Pepperdine, and then Chris Youngblood, who helped Abdur-Rahim get it going from Kennesaw to South Florida. So those are two programs I like to give the benefit of the doubt to, just with Chris Beard and Nate Oates.
Absolutely. With Chris Beard and Nate Oates, these guys do an absolutely incredible job. And I'm so glad that you bring up Chris Beard as well, because I also take a look at what Ole Miss has done out there in the SEC, and I'm just incredibly impressed by them as well. Now, Ole Miss is going to need to do a little bit of a better job on the glass than they did this last season. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. You bring in Jamarian Sharp, you have Moussa Cisse down low, and yet they weren't necessarily the world's greatest rebounding team, but it just feels like year number 2 is going to be incredibly different for Ole Miss and everything that they're able to develop, as this just feels like a little bit more of a Chris Beard style system, bringing in Mikel Brown-Jones, who was amazing at UNC Greensboro, Malik Diaz, some experience out there in the SEC, Sean Padula maybe turned the ball over a little bit much at Virginia Tech, but he's able to do it all at the guard spot. I'm not sure how you view this Ole Miss team, but I think that they're a big-time team on the come-up that I think could really make some noise in the SEC this year.
Absolutely. And Chris Beard, it took him a year to get it going at Texas Tech. I kind of view it the same way in Oxford. He's got the NIL collective going. I think they're going to make a jump here in the SEC in year number 2. And what's become a very, very competitive SEC, because you look at it, they were really good last year, but now they had Texas, now they had Oklahoma. The SEC is not just a football league anymore. Basketball has followed suit because of the NIL collectives and the TV agreements.
Absolutely. And I do think that with the SEC, it's going to be really interesting to gauge them this season, because I know that you've got a lot of affinity out there in the Big 12, and now Texas, along with Oklahoma, they're going to be heading on over to the SEC. And I think that's going to be so interesting to take a look at the conference realignment front this year, because the teams out there in the Big 12, they're used to it. They had to adapt to having Central Florida, having BYU and company in the mix. But as we know with the SEC, it's been largely the same conference for about a decade or so. And how do you view the realignment? And do you think that this is perhaps a little bit of an advantage for Texas and Oklahoma? Or do you think that this puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage? Because I do think that these SEC schools are going to have a little bit of a target on the back of both of those schools.
I think it's more so, though, in football than it is in basketball, just with the Texas brand. But basketball is going to be interesting just because Oklahoma and Texas kind of are geographically already right there. So they're not having to deal with what BYU and UCF did and some of the other Big 12 schools having to travel to those places. You look primarily in the SEC, it's the Southeastern Conference, and they've already had to go to Texas A&M, LSU. So from a geographical standpoint, it's not that big a transition. And I think playing in the Big 12 year after year has really put them equipped to transition nicely into the SEC.
Yep, I think so as well. And it's going to be a little bit of a different game, as in the SEC, we saw so many teams like Alabama, like Florida, absolutely run it and gun it. So it's going to be an interesting fit as to what we're going to be getting there. As we've got aboard Ryan McIntyre, who does great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and it certainly has been an interesting offseason for so many teams. And I was mentioning it before, you do a great job on the West Virginia front, and we all know that the biggest transfer that this team has brought in is Tucker DeVries, because that was a little bit of a package deal between he and his father, Darren. But that said, I like what they did a few days ago, bringing in Toby Oconee, the gentleman from UIC, 6'8", able pops and threes. They've got a little bit of a pipeline, really, from the state of Illinois. It's 3 of their 4 guys that they're bringing in. We're playing in the state of Illinois a season ago. But how do you take a look at a West Virginia team that I look at them right now, and if this were the roster that we'd be getting night number 1, I certainly do think that they'd be struggling out there in the Big 12, but I do like the hire of Darren DeVries. I do feel like, though, that they're probably going to need to hit the portal a little bit more here in the month of May to really fortify this roster.
They need to shore up the point guard position, especially in the Big 12, where the point guards come at you night after night. But from a perimeter standpoint, athletically, defensively, I like what they've done. They bring over the tandem from the Illini that came over with Chester Frazier, Sincere Harris, and Amani Hansberry. Sincere Harris has the upside of being one of the premier defensive guys in America. He just was playing behind Terrence Shannon, so he couldn't get on the floor. Toby Oconee coming over as well, could be one of the better defenders in the league, another 6'6" versatile guy. And then, of course, it helps to bring over the back-to-back Missouri Valley Player of the Year and the coach's son in Tucker DeVries. And a nice start here in the portal for Coach DeVries in year number 1, but they really got to shore up this point guard position and then probably get a rim protector as well at the 5 spot. Those are kind of the 2 spots they're really dialing in here in the next couple of weeks as we quickly approach the end of finally this portal era.
Yeah, it's very interesting because the portal is closing up May 1st. As we are recording this, there's a few hours left for guys to be able to get in, and by the time this uploads, it's pretty much going to be closed off. And how big do you think that it is that now all transfers, not just regular transfers, but graduate transfers as well, do have to declare by May 1st? Because I honestly do think that's a little bit of a good thing, and I do think that we should be allowing for player movement. At the same time, I do think that there should be some regulations, just because if you look at like any professional sports team, it'd be very, very strange if a team that you know and love, like I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, if like 80% of the roster year in and year out was just completely turning over. And that's almost what we're getting in college basketball. And I do think that it's great that these players have a little bit more movement, but I do think that this is a step in the right direction to really playing to both sides of it, having a little bit more familiarity, allowing the fans to get to know these guys a little bit better, and at the same time, give these guys the opportunity to be able to make some money and go where they please.
I completely agree. I mean, at some point, we got to cut down a little bit on the wild, wild west era that we've been dealing with, where everybody can just go wherever they want. 1 week, it's like the AAU circuit now in college basketball, where you can commit to one school, be at another one the next week, and then another week, another one the next week. So just a little bit of bringing it back to where it's a little bit of, hey, if I'm going to commit to the school, I actually have to abide by it. Kind of like in the professional league. You can't just play for the Miami Heat 1 week and then play for the Lakers 2 weeks later unless you're cut. So I think it is a good thing to have a little bit of regulation. Obviously, you mentioned it too, that these guys are in an era where they can leverage, and they have all the leverage with their playing ability with the NIL. So they do have the right to do that, but it is in a certain window now where it's not just anybody can leave at any minute now.
Absolutely. And let's not go back to the era where schools would get sanctions for giving guys like peanut butter to go along with their bagel and everything like that. That was ridiculous. And at the same time, when we've got guys going to 8 different schools in 8 years, and if you think I'm kidding, see AJ Storr, that's when we probably went a little bit too far as well. If we can get in the middle of A and B, I think that we're going to be in some pretty good standing. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly it is going to be so fascinating to see what we get with a lot of these moves over the next few weeks. But do you just want to get your thoughts here as to maybe a team or two that you're not hearing a lot about, but you love the moves that they've been making? Because we're all hearing about Kansas, and rightfully so. I think that Kansas, if they're not number one coming into the season, they're going to be number two. They and UConn look like very, very much powerful teams. I like what Indiana's done. Do have some question marks with regards to the coaching staff, Mike Woodson and company there, but they certainly have made some good moves. But who's maybe a team or two that you're not hearing a lot about, that you take a look at some of the moves and you think, man, this is working out really well and this team's not getting the love that they deserve?
I'll stick in the Big 12 here, where it's kind of a program that kind of sneaks up on everybody year in and year out just because everybody thinks they're boring to watch. It's Iowa State. Year 4 of the TJ Otzelberger era, where they finished, 70-35 the last 3 years. You look at what they've done in the portal, bring in a good piece with Joshua Jefferson coming over from St. Mary's, Deshaun Jackson from Charlotte, Nate Heiss from Northern Iowa, and then shooter in Brandon Chatfield as well. I like the pieces that they added to their core that's already good. They kind of had that UConn-like model where they have their core, they keep it intact, but they added a couple pieces in the portal. And I don't expect this program to take a step back and be another top 10 team once again next year in Ames.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I absolutely love what TJ Otzelberger has been able to do over at Iowa State. It's certainly a little bit more of a distinct style, but I think that it's going to work out so well. What I love about Iowa State is that they do find a lot of guys that just sort of fit their tempo as well. They're not bringing in a whole bunch of guys that were like playing at Alabama or something like that, where they were playing super duper up tempo, because that just wouldn't be a fit for them. And how much this time of year do you take a look at those sorts of things? Because I do take a look at some of these programs that are maybe like super up tempo, and then they try to bring in someone for like North Texas, for example. And I do put a little bit of a downgrade there. And then obviously vice versa, if you've got some team that is looking to absolutely run it and gun it. If you've got a guy from Alabama going to North Texas, I think that that's not necessarily the world's greatest fit as well. But how much do you take a look at those sorts of things as well? Because I do think that the style and tempo that a guy is coming from is very important as well. And that's something that I think does get lost in the importance of things, because everyone is just curious about, oh, how many points did he score at his other university?
Great point. I look at what West Virginia had with Kirk Kriisa last year. I never really thought he was the best fit in the world. Obviously, he was a really good player. He led the country in assists at Arizona for 2 years, but fit definitely does matter. You can't just go from, let's say, Virginia to Alabama or vice versa. Those won't fit. So just a couple teams that are having some unique parts. Everybody's hyping up Indiana, and they have added some pieces. But I think the issue still remains. Are they going to be able to make perimeter jump shots? That's the big question. USC's added a bunch of bodies to must bust. And just interested to see how these parts mesh. And of course, I know Calipari is not there anymore, but Kentucky's always going to be interesting. And Mark Pope bringing over some interesting pieces. Carr from Wake Forest, Lamont Butler making the step up from San Diego State, Wee from Oklahoma, and Amari Williams from Drexel. So a lot of guys potentially making big jumps here from their previous school to a blue blood. And it's not just a blue blood. I mean, that fan base is crazy. So interested to see how those guys make the jump to a place like Kentucky.
Yep, it is going to be very fascinating. And Kentucky is one of those schools that, in my opinion, they've got quite a bit of work to do here in the next few weeks to be able to fill out that roster. I do like that Mark Pope has been able to build some energy, but at the same time, going to need some guys to be able to back it up. And this man always backs up all the energy that he provides. You, Ryan, do such a great job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. I know you're an ace when it comes to college basketball, but you do great work on the college football side of things as well. I know you and Kobe Dant are also very much enveloped with regards to like spring football, with regards to what we're going to be seeing in college baseball and so much more. So love the good people that know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, Greg, especially with it being year-round now in college basketball with the portal in different areas. So, yeah, follow us on the college basketball experience, college football experience, and college baseball experience, and the Big 12 experience all year long. And for you West Virginia Mountaineer fans, go follow the Ryan and Rush Show. We're covering all West Virginia sports year-round. And Appreciate you having me on once again, Greg, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Absolutely. Ryan does a tremendous job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball all 12 months out of the year and always lends great insight. So big thanks to Ryan for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, he had another Ryan Bunctious day in the transfer portal yesterday. I'll give you guys all the news and notes that we did see in college basketball over the last 24 hours. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to have Ryan McIntyre aboard. He does such a good job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. It's hard to keep up with 100 million billion transfer portal moves, and yet he does so all so well, and every single time he joins this podcast, he lends such good insight. So big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast to give you a little bit of a recap as to all the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. It's getting down to the nitty gritty. I think that there's going to be a few guys that enter into the transfer portal that I missed out on, but just a few guys that aren't necessarily the biggest of guys, but at the same time, I do think that they could be impact guys. Luke Kazabuke, he's a 6'5", little bit of a sharpshooter that comes over from Illinois State. He was able to put in there a few points, was a nice little gadget guy. I do think that he could be someone that could be able to come into a program and could be able to do some nice things. He, from three-point range, has always been someone that has been in the high 30s with that regard, so he's a little bit interesting. You saw Javonte Brown, who began his career over at UConn and Texas A&M. Last season be relatively solid down low for Western Michigan. He was able to average about 9 points in 15.5 minutes per contest. He was not able to play for the beginning part of the season due to being one of those two-time transfers. He's a guy that did enter into the transfer portal. We saw quite a few guys from Maryland Eastern Shore, Damani Claxton, Elijah Wilson. These are guys that are going to be in the transfer portal as well. And then Jackson Edwards, he was one of the top scorers over at Valparaiso a season ago. He's decided that he's going to be entering, and I do have to laugh at this one, by the way, before we get back to Jackson Edwards, because I think that that's actually a relative impact guy. Moses Flowers is in the transfer portal as well, and Moses Flowers, my goodness, this guy has been in college basketball literally for forever. I had no idea he still had eligibility left. Last year at St. Bonaventure, averaged about 9.5 points per contest, shot 37.5% from three-point range, but because he only played 9 games for a season at Hartford, he is still eligible to be able to play college basketball. So, my goodness gracious, there you go there. But Jackson Edwards, who was over at Valparaiso this last season, began his career at Murray State. He's an intriguing guy. About 7.5 points, 5 boards, was a starter that shot about 32.5% from three-point range, 6'6" size. So, I do think that he's going to be able to make a little bit of an impact for a team that might be wanting him. And then you also saw Lucille Patterson, who I remember Charlotte posted a few days prior that they were all going to be running it back and everything like that. Well, he's out there in the transfer portal, and Patterson, he is going to be a very sought-after gentleman after he last season over at Charlotte was able to log about 14.5 points per contest, shot 35% from 3. Good ball handler, a part of one of the slower teams in all of college basketball. As that Charlotte team, they always played a very, very shall we say, traditional grinder style. So going to be interesting to see what we get there. And then the Mountain West Rookie of the Year in JT Toppin. This is a big add to the transfer portal. He decided that he is going to be checking his options. He was the Mountain West Rookie of the Year last year, and he was able to log 12.5 points, 9 boards, show good versatility at 6'9", shooting about 34.5% from three-point range. I think most teams in all of college basketball are very much going to be wanting his services, so that's one to take a look at. And then we did see West Virginia land a recruit after we talked with Ryan McIntyre. This happened late in the night on Tuesday. Eduardo Andre 3000 is going to be heading on over to West Virginia. I actually really like Eduardo Andre 3000, as every Andre is called Andre 3000 on this show because he is awesome. But that said, for Eduardo Andre, when he was out there on the floor for Fresno State, they were just such a better defensive team the last 2 years. This is not a guy that's going to go out there, he's going to score a bunch of points. Last 2 years at Fresno State was logging about 7.5 or so points per contest. He was giving you about 5.5 boards, a little bit over a block per game, but he just does a great job of the defensive side of things. I felt like Fresno State badly underutilized him and misused him, so I do think that this is going to be actually a very solid gift for West Virginia that's going to go a little bit under the radar. Braxton Maya, he's a 7-footer that was over at Washington the last 2 seasons. He heads on over to Nebraska. Biggest thing for Maya, he's another one of those guys that began his career over at Fresno State, so Fresno State has lost out on quite a few good big men, but that said, the biggest thing for him is just being able to be consistently out there on the floor. I know that he's dealt with a few injuries throughout his career. He was a part-time starter this last year over at Washington. His best year came during the 2022-23 campaign when he was a consistent starter at about 9 points, block and a half, 7 rebounds per game. This should be able to help out a Nebraska team that was a little bit hit or miss on the defensive side of things, and we did see a very big run on big men on Tuesday, as well as you also saw coming off the board Matthew Marsh. He was playing this last season over at Wake Forest. He has decided that he's going to Oregon State. This is a very, very rare win for Oregon State, and good grief do they need one. For Marsh, he didn't necessarily do a ton this past year, but he was over at Wake Forest, a 68% shooter from the floor, a guy that was able to give the team right around about 2.5 rebounds per game. His best year came during the 2022-23 campaign in the ACC. He was able to log about 6 points, a little bit over 4 boards per contest. Not going to be able to go out there and give you a whole bunch of shot blocks, but in comparison to the talent level that Oregon State has been bringing in, that is quite a bit of upside, so you do like to see that. And then one of the top players in terms of assists per game this past season, Elijah Hawkins. He's heading on over to Texas Tech, and this is just big for Texas Tech. He's probably going to be the heir apparent to Joe Toussaint for Elijah Hawkins. Not a guy that played super duper up-tempo or anything like that this past year at Minnesota, but played a very up-tempo style when he was over at Howard. He averaged 9.5 points, 7.5 assists per contest, and the big thing is, while he was over at Howard, he actually led all of college basketball in terms of turnovers per game. He was giving the team north of 4 turnovers per contest, cut that down by more than a full turnover per game this last season, took some very nice strides forward for Minnesota. So I think that that is a big add for them, and I think that this is a textbook perfect fit as well. Tariq Phelps, he was playing over at SMU this last season. He's decided that he's going to be going to Texas A&M. For Phelps, he's able to give you more than a steal and a half per contest, 4 boards, nearly 3 assists, 14.5 points per game. Now, the one thing that he doesn't do is necessarily pop threes, and Texas A&M is not going to be requiring him to do so. This Texas A&M program that always is not necessarily one of the world's greatest three-point shooting teams or anything like that, but he should be able to fit that defense really well. He should be able to just fit the system that I know has been so successful over the last few seasons. He's a guard that's willing to rebound, so I do take a look at this, and I do think that this is very big. And then also a former SMU player, Jefferson Coulibaly. He has decided that he's going to be going to Pacific, and man, Pacific just needs guys in general. It was a really rough era for them the last few seasons, and bringing in Coulibaly, it's a mark in the right direction for them. It's going to be a very long time, in my opinion, before they're able to rise back up. And I still remember, like 20 years ago, they were consistently making the NCAA tournament. Coulibaly was unable to get out there on the floor this past season, began his career over at Washington State, and at SMU was able to shoot about 46.5% from 3. It was on a very, very low volume of shots, but that's it. Just whatever wins you can take if you're Pacific, you've got to be able to take them. And this is a W for Kentucky. Brandon Garrison, he has decided that he is going to be heading on over from Oklahoma State, and he's going to be heading to Kentucky. For Garrison, he was a former top 100 recruit. He was able to do a solid job last year for Oklahoma State of being able to man the glass, 7.5 points, 5.5 boards. Not a guy that's going to be able to stretch a floor and pop threes, and trust me, the work is not done for Kentucky. They've done a nice job of really being able to add some stake. They haven't really had that sizzle quite yet, but you know what? Bringing in he along with Amari Williams, this team is going to be a little bit more tough-minded. They don't have the versatility like we saw out of Mark Pope back when he was coaching over at BYU, but so far he's done a nice job bringing in some guys that are going to be able to allow this team to be able to play good, tough defense, unlike what we saw a season ago from Kentucky. So I think it's very clear that our good friend and Mr. Pope got the memo that they're not going to be looking to run it back from a season ago. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens moving forward for Kentucky, but I thought that that was a relatively solid ad for them. This is also going to be a relatively solid ad, as well as we did see Chisom Opara enter into the transfer portal. He was playing over at Harvard this last season, and I think wherever Opara goes, there's going to be a lot of interest in him, as he last season was able to do a pretty rock-solid job of being able to provide in a wide variety of ways of Harvard. 16.5 points, 5 boards, shot about 34% from three-point range. He was really that number 2 scorer behind Malik Mack, got a little bit banged up towards the season last year, and does need to cut down on the 2.5 turnovers per game, but at 6'8", his overall skill set, that is something that a lot of teams are going to be very interested in, and I do think that he has a chance to be able to make a big impact for whatever team he's going to be able to go to, and I have to think that there's going to be a lot of power conference teams that are going to be very interested in his services, to say the least. Des White, he last season was playing over at Austin Peay for the Governators. He has decided that he is going to be entering into the transfer portal. White was a nice option for this team. He was able to log about 8 points per contest for White from three-point range. He was shooting in that pocket about 33% from the outside, was able to generate a steal per game. For Austin Peay, they've had a little bit of a rough start to the season under Corey Gibson, but it was a lot of guys that he brought in from Northwestern State that were all able to gel together. So going to be interesting to see who's going to be interested in his services, but I do think that there's going to be quite a few teams that are going to be in on him, and it's going to be very interesting to see who's all going to be in the fold for Holy Cross, but we know that Gabe Warren is going to be one of them. He was playing over at Rice this last season. We give our Oda Lane Kiffin go Owls, and for Holy Cross, they actually won a game against Georgetown this past season, but for Warren, he's just looking for a little bit of a new lease on life, was only able to give Rice about a point and a half per contest. He's a 6'6", a little bit of a combo player that I think in the Patriot League, he's going to be a relatively good fit there. So I do think that that is going to be one of impact, and a guy going from the Patriot League to the non-D1 level, JT Tan, who is about a 3 rebound per game guy over at Lehigh, he has decided that he's going to be going to Dominguez Hills, Cal State Dominguez Hills, and this is very easy for your handicap. Whenever you see something like this where a guy goes from the D1 level to the non-D1 level, all you need to do is cross them off your list of guys that you need to evaluate and move on. So those are the ones that we like because it's very, very clean and easy, and this is going to be very clean for a program. Whoever gets in Coleman Hawkins, he has decided that he's going to be entering into the transfer portal as well. Just a guy with so much versatility. Last year over at Illinois, 12 points, 6 boards, was able to throw in there a few assists per game as well at 6'10", shot 37% from 3-point range. Had a little bit of a rough go of it to begin the season, but he was really able to close out the season with a flurry. Once again, probably going to need to improve that defense just a little bit, as pretty much everyone on Illinois needed to. That said, very good offensive piece, and there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be interested in his services. And Jakari Spence, there were quite a few teams that were interested in his services. Last season played at Monmouth, and as a starter, he was able to shoot about 34% from 3-point range this past year. 2 years ago, I actually shot 36% from 3-point range for his career, about 38% from the outside, was able to throw in there a little bit under 4 assists, seal and half per contest. He goes to Jacksonville, just what the doctor ordered for Jacksonville. Jacksonville felt like they were a little bit out of sorts on the defensive side of things. It felt like they just needed that nice primary facilitator. They are now going to be getting it in Jakari Spence. This should be really able to help them out moving forward and allow Jacksonville to be able to play that slow and controlled style while still being relatively solid on the defensive side of things. Danilo Jananovic, he was playing last season at Louisville, pretty much a walk-on guy for Louisville. We're going to call it what it is. He's a little bit of a big man that has decided that he is going to be going to UW Milwaukee, but it's one of those cases where one team's cast-offs can sometimes be another team's treasures. As for BJ Freeman being out of the fold, that does really hurt this program just moving forward, as well as he was pretty much the team for them a season ago. But being able to bring in someone like a Danilo Janovic, I think it's going to be big for them. He brings a big body at about 6'8". He's a guy from the great state of Wisconsin, began his career over at Miami, so we shall see what he's able to provide. Probably not going to be as much as Terrence Williams is going to be able to provide USC. For USC, they're starting to run out of roster spots, as we have seen Eric Musselman really hit the portal hard, but bringing in Terrence Williams I think is big. 6'7", combo player that was able to log 12.5 points, 4.5 boards, shoots 40% from 3-point range. I think that he just fits the Eric Musselman style really well. And for USC, you're just wondering, all right, they're bringing in all these mid-major guys. I mean, they were able to tear it up at their respective levels, but are you going to be able to bring in that guy that really has a little bit more, for lack of a better term, oomph? I think that this really does it for them, because Chibuzo Agbo, prior to this, I felt like was one of their better transfers coming in. A nice sharpshooter while he was over at Boise State, but still, when you're banking on a guy from Boise State to really elevate the program, along with guys like Josh Cohen from UMass, who I like, but again, what's he going to be able to do out there in the Big Ten? Clark Slashert, he was solid at Penn. What is he going to be able to do in the Big Ten? Well, this guy knows the Big Ten very well. He's going to be able to come in, and he's going to be able to lend quite a bit of help. Freddie Hicks, he's got some familiarity with this school, as he has decided that he is going to be going from Arkansas State, and he is going to be heading to Tarleton State. Freddie Hicks, 2 seasons ago, was at Tarleton State, where he was one of their top scorers, and he was solid this last year at Arkansas State. Not quite as good as he was at Tarleton State during the 2022-23 campaign, where he logged about 16 points, 6 boards, a little bit over a steal per contest. But I mean, still, for Arkansas State, his 3-point shooting percentage went down to sub 30%, but still, he logged 12 points, 5.5 boards, 2 assists per game. I mean, this guy just does a little bit of everything. Very much knows that Tarleton style at 6'6". He is a complete menace, so absolutely love that pickup for them. And I love this pickup, as for Boise State, they just weren't able to utilize utilize Kobe Young to the best of his abilities, and he's decided that he is going to be going to Cal State Fullerton. This is going to be a big get for a Cal State Fullerton team that last year they just didn't have a lot in the backcourt for Young. He was a relatively highly touted guy coming out of the great state of Washington, just didn't really see a lot of minutes for Boise State, a career about 27.5% three-point shooter, but at 6'6", I think that he's going to do a nice job filling a nice role for the team, and I do think that he's going to be able to come in right away and make a nice impact, as I do think that KJ Lee is going to be able to do so for Central Missouri. He has decided that he's going to be going down to the non-D1 level, and that's a little bit surprising because for KJ Lee, he was able to see some relatively okay minutes for Western Illinois, got a few sporadic starts here and there, so once again, very easy for your handicap. You wish to get absolutely nothing but the best, but no longer do you need to evaluate him and see what he's going to be able to bring to the table for a D1 school because he's no longer at the D1 level. So those are the ones that are able to keep things all nice, clean, easy, and just moving forward in general. And then we also did see Mcintrye, a former 5-star guy who over at UC Santa Barbara this last season. And for UC Santa Barbara, that was one of the biggest disappointments in all of college basketball, but he's heading on over to SMU as well. We're going to be talking a little bit more about SMU and the ACC as a whole tomorrow when we get Brandon Marks of the Athletic aboard, but for Traore, former top 50 guy, he put up some nice offensive numbers, 14.5 points, 5 boards. He just clearly wasn't the world's greatest fit defensively for UC Santa Barbara, but that said, he's a guy that has a really nice post game, not a guy that's going to go out there and pop threes or anything like that, but I do think that this is massive upside for an SMU team that's done an absolutely masterful job of being able to scour the transfer portal. Bringing in Kevin Boopy Miller was very big for them, and now you bring in Mcintrye, a guy with a lot of upside. I think that this is going to be a very, very big year for SMU and year number 1 out there in the ACC, and I do think that VCU staring at a pretty nice year as well, as they're landing Jamari Thomas. He last season was over at Norfolk State, and he was a dominator out there in the MEAC. He was a MEAC Player of the Year, 17 points, just under 4 boards, 4 assists, shot 38% from three-point range, and he does a nice job of generating turnovers. Was able to get about 2 steals per game now with VCU, and changing over the coaching guard, to say the least, with Mike Rhodes leaving, and now they've got Mr. Odom in the fold. They're not prioritizing that quite as much, but that said, I do take a look at that, and I think that it's going to be able to make a big, giant impact for them moving forward, as you tell that VCU was missing a little bit of oomph in terms of generating turnovers. He's a good defensive player. He's a good offensive player. Great fit for VCU, in my opinion. And then Yaquan Sanders, he was playing this last season over at Seton Hall. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Hofstra, and Hofstra does a good job of just being able to scour the portal for some of these guards that they might be a little bit more cast-offs, to say the least, and they've already got one Yaquan on the team, Yaquan Carlos, who he decided that he was going to be entering in the transfer portal in the offseason as well, so they trade one for another for Saunders. He, this last season, was able to give the team about 2.5 points per contest, shot about 35% from 3. Unlike what you were able to get out of Yaquan Carlos, he's not going to be popping it from three-point range quite as much or anything like that, but that said, I know that 247 Sports, when he was coming out of high school, they had him as a relatively highly touted guy. He was like a top 5 prospect out there in the state of New York in terms of the guard position, so I do think that he's going to be able to come in immediately and be able to give the team some nice upside. And for Hofstra, under Speedy Claxton, they've been able to do a really good job with their offense in general. They still have a few pieces that they're probably going to be needing to bring in a little bit further down the line if they want to be one of those top teams out there in the Coastal Conference, but they've already been able to bring in Gene Anarudin, hopefully I said that correctly, coming in from Iona, sharpshooter there. Cruz Davis was over at St. John's. Michael Graham is someone that's able to pull in some boards. He comes in from Loyola Marymount, so really like the haul that they've been able to have. And then I like this move as well. You've got Brendan Housley. He was playing over at Southern Utah last year. He's going to be heading on over to Utah State, so he's going to be staying within the state for Housley. He was able to do a nice job of being just that spot up, knock down the mid-range jumper sort of guy. Not a guy that necessarily shoots it well from 3, only about 27.5%, but was able to log as a freshman at about 6'4", 11 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists. Have to wonder how his game is going to be translating up to the Mountain West level. That said, I do think that he's going to be able to come in right away. He's going to be able to make a little bit of a nice impact, and I do think that this is going to be an impact guy as well. The Tulsa to Tennessee State, shall we say, a pipeline has been very, very big on both sides. And for Carlos Williams, he last season was playing over at Tulsa. He's decided that he is going to be going to Tennessee State. I do think that this is going to be a nice impact piece for a Tennessee State team that was relatively solid in the OVC this past year. With Carlos Williams, he was a pretty highly touted junior college guy a few seasons ago, and he was solid this last year. Shot about 32.5% from three-point range, 5 points, a little bit over 4 rebounds per game. Had a little bit of an issue on the defensive side of things, but at 6'5", he's able to stretch the floor in a wide variety of ways, so I do like what he's going to be able to provide. And then we saw Nigel Burris, who just could not get out there on the floor last season over at Utah State. He's decided that he is going to be heading back to, shall we say, the mid-major level. He has decided that he is going to be playing for Weber State. In Nigel Burris, was really able to bust through when he was with Idaho 2 seasons ago. 2 seasons ago over at Idaho, he was able to give the team 9 points and shot 45% from 3. Literally did not make a single 3 this last season over at Utah State. He was only able to log about a point per contest. Him going on over to Weber State is big, as Weber State loves to feature just a little bit more of a thin rotation. The Duff man has been able to deliver thus far over at Weber State, and Eric Duff. You saw them last year just really have Dylan Jones be that do-it-all sort of player. I think that they're going to want to have a little bit more depth this season, and having a spot-up shooter like Nigel Burris, I think that that is very much a step in the right direction for them, and we are trying to take strides in the right direction of being able to get you guys all that you need to know in college basketball. We are scouring the portal, taking a look at all these moves, and getting you set for what we hope to be the most successful season ever in college basketball. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GN_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And a big thanks once again to our good friend Ryan McIntyre of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network for joining me in the last segment, coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off-season, and let me come back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.